The sound came first. Not a voice, not a siren, just the synchronized strike of 23 hands against 23 chests, filling the narrow hospital corridor like a single clap of thunder trapped indoors. Morgan Calloway did not move. She sat in the wheelchair at the center of that sound, still wearing the scrubs she had bled through 12 hours ago, the left leg wrapped in white gauze already faintly stained at the thigh. Her hands rested flat on the armrests. Not gripping, just resting. The way a person rests their hands when they have learned, over many years, that appearing calm is the first weapon available to them. 23 Marines in dress blues stood at rigid attention along both walls of the hallway. Young faces, older eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen something they could not unsee, and had made peace with that fact by showing up for the people who deserved it. At the far end of the line, Lieutenant Colonel Diana Merritt stood with her arm raised in a salute that was not theatrical. It was not performed for cameras. It was the real thing, and everyone in that corridor knew the difference. Morgan looked at her, looked at all of them. She did not salute back. Her arm would not obey that particular command right now, and she did not pretend otherwise. Behind the Marines, pressed against the wall near the emergency exit, a man in a navy blue vest checked his phone. He was not young, but carried himself like someone who had never fully accepted that fact. He read something on his screen, typed a short reply, and slid the phone back into his pocket with the calm of a man who has already decided how a situation will end. He did not look at Morgan. He did not need to. The narrator's voice arrives here, low and deliberate, the way important things get said. 4 years ago, she chose to disappear. Tonight, the world found her again, and what she was about to discover was that some people had known exactly where she was the entire time. Cut to 36 hours earlier. The hospital parking lot at 5:15 in the morning is the loneliest geography on Earth. Every car belongs to someone who stayed too long or arrived too early. The overhead lights have that particular fluorescent pallor that makes everything look slightly posthumous. And the air in Harlan County, Kentucky at this hour carries the cold of the mountains without the beauty of them. Morgan walked to her Civic with the unhurried pace of someone who had long since stopped expecting the day to offer anything it had not already offered 100 times before. Her left leg dragged fractionally on the downstroke, the kind of hitch that a stranger might not notice, but that Morgan felt with every single step. A quiet reminder that refused to be silent. 14-hour shift, 3 code blues, 1 gunshot wound from a domestic dispute that nobody in the room wanted to ask questions about. And near the end, a delivery that went sideways in the way deliveries sometimes do in a hospital, with equipment 3 budget cycles past replacement, requiring the kind of improvised decision-making that nursing school does not prepare you for and combat does. She had handled all of it. She always handled all of it. That was the thing no one on the day shift quite understood about Morgan Cole, which was the name she used here, the name on her employee file, the name she answered to without hesitation because she had practiced until it felt natural. They knew she was good. They knew she was calm in the room when calm was the only tool left. They knew she had a slight limp and kept to herself and never came to the holiday party, and always, without exception, chose the booth in the corner with her back to the wall. They did not know why. She pulled out of the lot and turned onto Route 421, heading south. The radio came on automatically. Local AM, the station that ran agriculture reports and county commission minutes, and the occasional breaking story that would not be breaking anywhere else on Earth. The anchor's voice was filling the dead air between songs when the name arrived. Senator Arthur Kane concluded his meeting with the Harlan County Memorial Board of Directors yesterday evening, the anchor said, regarding the hospital's participation in the Rural Healthcare Infrastructure Initiative. Morgan's right hand moved before her brain issued the command. The radio went silent. She drove the remaining 4 miles to Kettle Fork in that silence, and she did not examine why she had turned the dial. And she did not examine the tightness that had moved through her chest when she heard that name. And she did not examine any of it, because that was the arrangement she had made with herself 4 years ago, and it had worked. It had worked, she told herself. It had worked until today. The Kettle Fork Diner sat at the junction of 2 roads that went nowhere particularly important, which was precisely why it had survived since 1971, while every other business at that intersection had not. The sign in the window promised home cooking in letters that had faded from red to the color of an old brick. Inside, the air was coffee and bacon grease, and the institutional warmth of a place that kept the heat too high, because most of its regulars were old enough to feel the cold more than they used to. Morgan chose the rear booth. Left wall, clear line to the front door and the kitchen passed through. She had sat here enough times that Ruth Ann, who worked the early shift on weekdays, was already moving toward her with the coffee pot before Morgan had removed her jacket. Just the usual, Morgan said. Ruth Ann filled the mug and moved on without ceremony, which was exactly the dynamic Morgan had cultivated. Known enough to be served without questions, unknown enough to be left alone. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out the window at the empty highway and let her mind do what it needed to do after a long shift, which was not quite thinking and not quite resting, but something in between that she had never found a clean word for. At the counter, a young man in Marine Corps dress blues sat on a stool with his back slightly too straight for someone who had been seated for a while. Mid-20s. The kind of posture that either means fresh from boot camp or recently returned from somewhere that made you forget how to relax. His coffee was barely touched. He was looking at his phone with the expression of someone reading a message from home, and there was something in the softness of it that did not match the uniform. Morgan cataloged him the way she cataloged everything, quickly and without attachment. Corporal insignia, 2nd Marine Division patch. Came home recently, probably for a reason he was still processing. Not her concern. She looked back out of the window. The eggs arrived. She ate mechanically. The toast was cold. She did not care. Food was logistics, not pleasure, and she had learned that distinction in places where the distinction was the only thing keeping you functional. She was halfway through the eggs when the bell above the front door made its sound. 3 men walked in at 5:47 in the morning. The first thing wrong was the way they moved, not the way people move when they are cold and hungry and looking for a place to sit. They move the way people move when they have already decided what is going to happen in the next few minutes and are simply arriving at the location where it will occur. Morgan set her fork down, slowly, without looking at it. The first man was tall and wore a black jacket despite the warmth inside the diner. He did not look at the menu board. He looked at the room, measuring it the way a person measures a space they intend to control. The second man was shorter, heavier in the shoulders, wearing a red baseball cap pulled low over a face that was already decided. His eyes moved immediately to the Marine at the counter and stayed there. The third was young, 22, maybe 23, pale in the way that is not health but its absence. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and he was breathing slightly too fast, a man trying to appear calm and failing at the cellular level. 2 seconds. That was how long it took Morgan to read all of this. 2 seconds. The way a trained reader scans a page and absorbs it whole, not word by word, but in total. The second man's right hip was weighted differently than his left. The tall man's jacket hung slightly wrong on one side. The young one's hands in his pockets were not relaxed. They were gripping something. Morgan's fork was still in her right hand. She placed it on the plate without sound. The tall man reached into his jacket. "Everybody down. Get on the floor right now." His voice hit the diner like something thrown. Not loud in the conventional sense, but with the particular quality of a voice accustomed to being obeyed, which made it louder in the ways that mattered. The semi-automatic pistol in his hand made a more persuasive argument than his tone. Ruth Ann dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the tile and sent a brown wave across the floor, and the crash was the sound of the moment becoming something that could not be unmade. An older man at the counter began to push himself off his stool. The second man fired a round into the ceiling. The sound in an enclosed space is not like it sounds in films. It is a physical event. It takes up space in your chest and your ears and somewhere behind your eyes, and for 2 full seconds after it, no one in the room is capable of processing language. Morgan processed language. She had heard that sound before, many times. In conditions where the response time between hearing and acting was the margin between someone going home and someone not going home. The Marine at the counter had half turned on his stool. His hands were visible, raised, doing the right thing. His jaw was tight and his eyes were wide, and he was not going to do anything stupid, which was smart of him. But he was sitting in a dress uniform in a diner where one of 3 armed men had locked eyes on him and was now walking toward him with the specific energy of someone with a grievance and a weapon. Wallets and phones. Now, the tall man swept his gun across the room. The second man was already moving toward the Marine. "You think that uniform makes you something special?" The second man stopped 4 feet from the Marine's stool. He was not asking a question. He was performing one, And the performance was building towards something Morgan recognized because she had seen it before in different countries under different skies. The moment when a man with a weapon and an audience decides to make a point with the loudest tool available to him. His finger was on the trigger. His arm was coming up. Morgan was already moving. She did not decide to move. The decision had been made for her years ago, etched into her nervous system through repetitions she had stopped counting. And what happened in the next 2 seconds was not courage or recklessness or heroism. It was muscle memory asserting itself over the part of the brain that weighs odds. Down. The word came out of her the way commands come out when there is no time for anything but the essential. Low, flat, absolute, not a request, not a warning. An order delivered by a voice that had delivered orders in the dark, in the dirt, in the kind of noise that made ordinary speech impossible. The Marine dropped. Whether it was the word or the impact of her body arriving behind it, she could not have said. She hit him from the rear into the seat, her left shoulder driving into his back, both of them going off the stool and down onto the tile floor as the gun went off and the bullet went somewhere that was not the Marine's head. They hit the floor hard. All the air left Morgan's lungs simultaneously. The Marine's dress uniform crumpled beneath them. Above, the second man stared at the space where his target had been, at the smoke curling from his barrel, at the two people on the floor who had not been there a moment ago. One frozen second. Then Morgan was rolling, hauling the Marine with her by the collar, putting the solid weight of the counter between them and the shooters. Her body moving through the motions of cover and concealment, the way water moves through a channel it has worn for itself over years. "Stay down," she said. "Do not speak. Do not move until I tell you." He nodded. His eyes were wide, but he was not panicking. Good. She filed that away. The young one, the pale one, was coming apart. She could hear it in his voice from across the diner. His words were climbing and fragmenting. "We need to go. We need to go right now. We need..." The tall man hit him once, open-handed. The sound was sharp. "Shut up." But Morgan could already hear the other sound, distant and rising. Sirens. Multiple units. Someone in the diner had been smart enough and quiet enough to trigger something without being noticed. And the tall man's head had already snapped toward the door, and the calculation on his face was no longer about wallets and phones. "Grab what you can. Move." The second man fired once more. A wild shot. No target, just noise and anger. And the bullet punched through the window beside the booth where Morgan had been sitting, and something hot and sharp caught her in the left thigh. Not the bullet itself, a fragment of ricocheted tile moving with enough velocity to slice through the fabric of her scrub pants and into the muscle beneath. The pain arrived the way serious pain always arrives, not at first, and then all at once. She looked down, dark stains spreading through the fabric, deep enough to matter. "You're hit!" The Marine's voice was close. He had seen it. "I know. Keep down." The three men were gone. The bell above the door rang once, mockingly, and tires screamed in the parking lot, and then there was only the ragged sound of people breathing in a space where something terrible had almost happened, and something terrible still had, depending on how you counted. Morgan pressed her palm flat against her thigh and held it there, and breathed through her nose in the slow, deliberate way she had learned was more useful than every other available option. The Marine was beside her. "You saved my life." His voice had the particular quality of a person saying something they cannot quite make fit the dimensions of ordinary language. Morgan did not respond. She was counting her heartbeats, bringing them down from the place they had gone, and she was also scanning the diner because old habits require complete evidence before they stand down, not just the sound of tires disappearing. Ruth Ann emerged from beneath one of the booths, sheet white, hands shaking. The older man at the counter had not been hit. A woman in the corner was crying silently under a table. A contractor in work clothes near the window had gone to his knees with his hands still raised as if the gunman were still in the room. Morgan began cataloging injuries even as her own leg continued to tell her things she was choosing to hear later. When she tried to stand, the leg chose a different conversation. The Marine caught her before she made contact with the floor a second time. His grip was steady in the way of someone trained to carry weight under bad conditions. She pushed against his shoulder. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through the bandage you haven't put on yet." Ruth Ann was on the phone, shaking voice, precise information. Someone had trained her once, or she was simply the kind of person who functions when others cannot. The sirens were close now, red and blue through the broken window, painting everything in alternating color. Morgan leaned against the counter and kept her palm on her thigh and looked at the door to make sure it stayed what it was. an exit and not an entrance, and the Marine stayed close without crowding her. And somewhere in the middle distance, the sun was beginning to suggest itself over the ridge east of town. She had not thought in the diner about Operation Blackthorn. She had not thought about the 8 names she carried the way some men carry a photograph, folded and worn at the creases. She had not thought about the years of distance she had built between herself and everything that uniform had meant. She had thought about the angle of the barrel and the position of the Marine's head and the distance between herself and both of those things. That was all. The paramedics came through the door at a controlled run, voices overlapping, hands already moving toward equipment. A woman knelt beside Morgan and spoke in the clipped professional shorthand of someone who assesses first and asks later. Female, mid-30s, laceration to the left thigh, significant blood loss, hands on wound, conscious and oriented. What's your name? Morgan opened her mouth, and for a moment, a genuinely strange moment that she would not examine until much later, she was not sure which name to give. Harlan County Memorial Hospital was her hospital, which felt like the universe making a joke at her expense. She knew the smell of it, the particular squeak of the third wheel on the supply cart in Bay 7, the way the ventilation system made a sound like breathing at 2 in the morning when the ER was quiet. She had spent 4 years making this place familiar enough to feel safe, and now she was the patient in it, which inverted the entire arrangement. Dr. Patricia Olson was the kind of woman who had earned her authority through decades of being right more often than anyone else in the room, and she wore that authority lightly because she had nothing to prove to anyone, including herself. She stood at the foot of Morgan's bed with Morgan's chart in her hand and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and the expression of someone who has just read something that changes the context of everything she thought she knew. She set the chart down, came around to the side of the bed, pulled on gloves. The wound itself was clean as these things go, tile fragment rather than bullet, but it was deep enough that the attending had needed to go in properly, and while he was in there, he had found what Dr. Olson was now looking at, a landscape of old damage. Not one injury, a pattern of them, healed but not erased. The kind of scarring that told a specific story to anyone who knew how to read it. Dr. Olson knew how to read it. She kept her voice even and low, because they were not alone in the ER, and Morgan had made certain things plain over 4 years without ever saying them directly. These older injuries, she said, the scarring pattern. Morgan, this is blast fragmentation. This is high-velocity explosive fragmentation, and it is not from today. I'm aware of my own medical history. The way you manage it suggests otherwise. Her voice was not unkind. You never filed for VA disability benefits. You listed your next of kin as none. You've been here 4 years, and I don't know your emergency contact because you've never provided one. Morgan stared at the ceiling. I'm not asking you to explain it to me. Dr. Olson stripped off her gloves. I need you to know that I will be documenting what I found, which I am legally required to do, and that in light of the media attention currently developing around this morning's incident, there will likely be people with more authority than me asking questions I cannot deflect for you. What media attention? Dr. Olson hesitated. Then she picked up the tablet from the bedside table and placed it in Morgan's hands. The video had been shot from a phone, shaky, and slightly overexposed in the diner's fluorescent light. But the audio was devastatingly clear. Morgan's voice, flat and commanding, cutting through the chaos. The blur of movement, the moment of impact, the Marine going down, the shot going wide. Then Morgan on the floor, pressing her palm to her own wound with the same focused calm she had applied to every other wound in that room. Down in the corner of the screen, 9.2 million views, posted 4 hours ago. 3 comments were visible without scrolling. The first said she was a hero. The second questioned whether the event was staged. The third had posted what appeared to be her home address. Morgan handed the tablet back without expression. 2 minutes later, Edward Holloway walked into her room. She had seen him 3 times before in 4 years, each time at a distance. Department head meetings she attended because absence created questions, standing at the back of the room, leaving before the refreshments. She knew his name from the organizational chart. She knew his salary from a slip of paper she had found in the copier tray once, which told her more about the institution's priorities than any mission statement. He was 57 and moved like a man who had never been in a room he did not feel entitled to occupy. Navy blue vest, Rolex that announced itself quietly, which was worse than a loud one. The kind of polished appearance that required daily maintenance and suggested that daily maintenance was among his primary concerns. He did not sit. That was the first tell. He stood near the door. Plausible exit geometry. Miss Calloway, I wanted to personally express the hospital's concern for your well-being. Morgan looked at the ceiling. Given the nature of this morning's incident and the media attention that has unfortunately followed, the hospital feels it would be appropriate to offer you a period of paid administrative leave while we conduct a review of the circumstances. 6 months, possibly longer, with your full salary maintained and your position held. He placed a folder on the rolling tray beside her bed. Pale blue, 6 pages, she estimated without opening it. This is standard procedure for staff involved in traumatic incidents. Morgan turned her head and looked at him for the first time. Is the NDA clause on page 4 or page 5, she said. Holloway's expression did not change, but something beneath the expression did, a micro-adjustment in the muscles around his eyes that a person would miss if they had not spent years reading faces for exactly that kind of flicker. This is a standard support document. It contains a clause preventing me from speaking to any media outlet, cooperating with any law enforcement investigation, or making any public statement regarding hospital operations. She kept her voice flat and factual, the way she stated blood pressure readings and medication dosages. That is not standard support. That is a liability instrument. We're thinking of your well-being. You were thinking of your well-being before you walked in here. She looked back at the ceiling. The folder stays on the tray. You can take it with you or leave it. Either way, I'm not signing it. A pause. Miss Calloway, I want to be direct with you. You are per diem staff. No contract. No union representation. The hospital has full discretion regarding your continued employment, and in light of your actions this morning, which placed both yourself and others in a potentially dangerous situation, there are members of the board who feel that a more formal separation may be in the institution's best interest. Morgan did not move. You're threatening to fire me for saving someone's life. I'm advising you of your employment situation and offering you a generous alternative. Get out of my room. Morgan's voice had not risen. It had done the opposite, gone quieter, denser, the way the air gets dense before weather. Holloway heard something in it that he was not accustomed to hearing directed at him, and for one unguarded moment it showed. He picked up the folder without haste, buttoned his jacket, turned toward the door. Think carefully about the position you're putting yourself in, he said. I'm thinking about it right now, she said. Get out. He left. The door closed with the careful softness of a man who would not give her the satisfaction of knowing he was angry. Morgan stared at the ceiling and breathed and said nothing for 40 seconds. Then she said to the empty room, he knew before the ambulance called it in. The room did not answer, but Dr. Olson stepped back through the doorway. She had not gone far. I'm sorry, Olson said. He was here 40 minutes after the call. The call didn't come in until after dispatch arrived. Morgan turned her head. How did he know I was involved before anyone notified him? Olson held Morgan's gaze for a moment. Then, I thought the same thing. Something moved behind Morgan's eyes that was not quite recognition and not quite fear, but lived in the neighborhood of both. She picked up her personal phone from the bedside table. The attending had returned it with her belongings an hour ago. 31 missed calls, hundreds of notifications. Somewhere in the noise, one message from a number she had last seen 4 years ago, and she did not open it, and she set the phone back down. Corporal Dominic Vega knocked on the frame of the open door at that moment. He had changed from his dress blues into the civilian clothes he must have had in a bag somewhere. Jeans and a gray thermal, which made him look younger and somehow more serious at the same time. He had been in the waiting room since the ambulance, Ruth Ann had told her, and had asked about Morgan's condition every 20 minutes with the regularity of someone on watch. He crossed the room to the chair beside the bed and sat without asking permission. She did not tell him to leave. That itself was unusual. My uncle served with 2nd Battalion, the 7th Marines, he said. Helmand, 2019 to 2020. He doesn't talk about it much. Morgan was quiet. But the way you moved in there, he looked at his hands, then back at her. That wasn't civilian. That wasn't even regular military. He paused. Fleet Marine Force Corpsman? She did not confirm. She did not deny. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has learned that silence is its own answer only when you choose to let it be. I'm going to call my unit, he said. Tell them what happened. Don't. He looked at her steadily. With respect, he said, that's not your call to make. His voice was quiet and certain in the way of someone who has also learned a thing or two about which calls belong to whom. He took out his phone and stepped into the hallway, and Morgan heard him speaking in the low, deliberate cadence of someone delivering a report. She pressed 2 fingers to her pulse point and it counted. Steady, a little fast, but steady. On the hallway side of the door, she heard Vega's end of the conversation end with a single word she recognized from a decade of carrying it in her chest like a piece of shrapnel of its own. Semper Fi. The evening shift came on, and the day quieted down to the frequencies that hospitals operate on after dark. Monitors and distant footsteps in the particular silence that falls around serious things. Morgan had been moved to a room on the 3rd floor. The wound had been properly debrided and sutured, 12 stitches, no major vessel involvement, but blood loss enough that they wanted her on IV fluids overnight and movement was not on the agenda. She lay in the dim room and looked at the ceiling and did the things she had learned to do in the years since Blackthorn. She let her mind walk the edges of the dark without walking into it. She thought about the 8 names. She did not avoid thinking about them. She had stopped avoiding it sometime in the 2nd year when she realized that avoidance was not protection. It was just a different kind of damage. What she did not think about was what came after. The review board, the paperwork, the letter that had arrived at her sister's address 6 weeks after she had already stopped existing under her real name. The letter with the bronze and the citation in the official language of valor that she had never opened. She was thinking about none of this when the knock came. It was a soft knock, not the knock of a nurse or a doctor, a knock that asked rather than announced. "Come in," she said. The woman who entered was 32 years old and looked like she had been awake for most of them. She was thin in the way of someone who forgets to eat when they are deep in something, and she moved with the particular alertness of a person who is always slightly more aware of their surroundings than the situation seems to call for. She identified herself as Dana Wyrick. "The Harlan Gazette," she said, and held up her press credential. "I'm not doing interviews." "I know." Dana did not advance further into the room. She reached into the bag over her shoulder and removed a folded piece of paper and crossed just far enough to place it on the tray at the foot of the bed. "I just need you to read that." Morgan did not touch it. "I'm going to leave it there," Dana said, "and I'm going to wait in the hallway for 10 minutes. If you want me to take it back, I will. If you want to talk, the door will be open." She left. Morgan looked at the paper for 30 seconds without moving. Then she leaned forward, which the stitches objected to, and unfolded it. 4 words, handwritten in the center of the page. "Holloway, Shell Companies, your hospital." Below them, a number in parentheses, 14 million. Morgan sat with that number for a moment. Then she got out of the bed. This was not recommended. Her leg had opinions about it that she overrode with the kind of calm authority she applied to most physical objections. She found her crutch where the attending had left it against the wall, put weight on it, crossed the room, opened the door. Dana Wyrick was in the hallway exactly as promised, leaning against the wall with her bag on her shoulder and her hands in her jacket pockets, not on her phone, not looking at anything in particular. Waiting. "Come in," Morgan said. Dana came in. She did not set up a recorder. She did not take out a notebook. She removed a laptop from her bag, opened it, turned it to face Morgan, and stepped back. The document on the screen was 89 pages, formatted in the tight, footnoted style of investigative journalism. The letterhead at the top read Associated Press Investigative Unit. 8 months, Dana said quietly. "I've been in Harlan 8 months. I am not a local reporter." Morgan's eyes moved across the first page. Shell companies. Billing irregularities. A pattern repeated across multiple facilities in multiple states. The kind of architecture that took time and money and contacts to build, and that told you immediately, if you knew what you were looking at, that you were not dealing with opportunism, but with deliberate design. "One of the 3 men in the diner this morning," Dana said. "Tyler Kane, 23 years old." She pulled up a photograph on a second window. A thin young man with nervous eyes and the expression of someone who is perpetually bracing for something. "He is the nephew of Senator Arthur Kane of Virginia," Dana said. And Edward Holloway knew Tyler Kane would be in that diner this morning before the robbery occurred. The room was quiet. Morgan looked at the photograph of Tyler Kane. She thought about the moment he had turned at the diner door before running, the expression on his face that she had cataloged and filed away without analyzing. She thought about it now. "Holloway came to buy my silence 2 hours after the call came in," Morgan said. "That's too fast for coincidence." "He didn't come to buy your silence about the robbery," Dana said. She was looking at Morgan steadily, the way someone looks at a person they have been trying to reach for a long time and are now finally looking at directly. "He came because you're a witness, and you work in his hospital, and he needed to know how much you've seen. Morgan turned that over slowly. How much have I seen, she said. That's the question. Dana closed the laptop halfway. You've been in that building for 4 years. You've worked in every wing. You've seen the billing department, the vendor invoices, the equipment orders. She paused. What have you actually noticed, Morgan? The use of her real name was quiet and deliberate, and it landed differently than she had expected. How do you know that name? Morgan said. Dana did not look away. I'm a reporter. It is my job to know. And I've known for 6 weeks. She held up a hand before Morgan could respond. I have not printed it. I will not print it without your consent. The story I'm writing is about the money, not about you. But to write it, I need someone who was inside that building and saw what I couldn't see from the outside. Morgan looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, before you leave tonight, I need you to answer one question. Dana waited. The person who helped me establish a life here 4 years ago. The paperwork, the references, the lease. Morgan's voice was careful and level. Was that person acting independently, or were they connected to something I should have been running from instead of toward? Dana held her gaze. That is the right question, she said, and I don't have the answer yet. She stood, pulled her jacket closed, crossed to the door. You should know something, she said with her hand on the frame. What happened this morning in that diner? The way you moved, the way you read the room. There are people who know what that means, and some of those people are not on your side. She stepped into the hallway. The door stayed open behind her, the way she had said it would. Morgan sat alone in the room and looked at the pale blue folder that Holloway had left on her rolling tray, still sitting there, unsigned, waiting. She thought about Edward Holloway typing on his phone in the diner, the man in the Navy vest who had known before the call went out. She thought about the name on the radio that she had silenced by reflex. She thought about 4 years of quiet that had turned out, in the space of a single morning, to be something other than safe. She was not afraid. That was the honest answer, and she had always preferred honest answers. What she was, sitting alone in a hospital room in the town she had chosen to disappear into, was something she had not been in 4 years. She was paying attention. By 6:30 the following morning, 14 million people had watched Morgan Calloway throw herself across a diner in Harlan County, Kentucky. She did not know this yet. She knew the number on her phone screen the previous night had been very large and moving upward, and she had set the phone face down on the bedside table and done what she always did with things she could not immediately fix, which was to triage them out and deal with the rest first. The rest right now was her leg. The wound was not complicated, but it was honest. 12 stitches holding together something that would take time to trust again, and the ache that came with it was the kind that could be managed but not ignored. A constant, low voice speaking a language Morgan had learned to translate without letting it run her schedule. She had been managing pain for a long time. This particular version was merely a new chapter in an old conversation. The morning nurse came in at 6:15, checked her vitals, and left without commentary, which was the correct professional approach. Dr. Olson followed at 6:40 with Morgan's chart and the expression of a woman who had been awake for most of the night herself. The story is national, Olson said. Not local, national. Morgan looked at the window. Gray morning light, the kind of light that Kentucky produces in October. Flat and without warmth, honest in the way of things that make no promises. Every major network has footage of you in the diner, Olson continued. Someone in the restaurant shot 40 seconds of video that includes audio. Clear audio, the way you spoke to that young Marine, the way you moved. She set the chart down. Morgan, they're calling you a hero. I reacted, Morgan said. That's different. The public doesn't appear to be making that distinction. Morgan turned from the window. Then the public can sort itself out. Olson sat down in the chair beside the bed, which she had not done the previous evening, which meant this visit was not going to be brief. There's also the question of your employment status. She kept her voice level. Holloway spoke to the board this morning via video call. His position is that your actions, while well-intentioned, place staff and patients at risk and constitute grounds for termination under the hospital's conduct policy. She paused. He's using language about liability exposure and incident protocols. He's trying to move first, Morgan said. Yes, and I want you to understand what that means. If he terminates you before you can speak publicly, whatever you say afterward becomes the statement of a disgruntled former employee. The framing matters. Morgan looked at her steadily. You're telling me I need to do something. I'm telling you that doing nothing is also a choice, and not a neutral one. Olson stood, smoothed her coat. At the door, she stopped. The way people stop when they have decided to say the thing they came to say and almost talk themselves out of it. That young man is alive because of you, she said. I've been in medicine for 27 years and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen someone move the way you moved. She looked at Morgan directly. Don't let them bury that. She left. Morgan sat with the silence for a moment. Then she reached for her phone. The number was still at the top of her missed calls, still unread, the name she had not seen in 4 years. She did not call it. Instead, she opened the browser and searched for the video. Found it in 11 seconds. Watched it once with the sound off, then once with the sound on. She had known in some abstract way that someone had been filming. The knowledge had processed and been categorized as a non-priority mid-event, the way all non-tactical information processes when the tactical information is actively trying to kill someone. Watching it now was different. Watching it now, she saw what the camera had seen. The stillness before she moved. The flat economy of the movement itself. Nothing wasted, no hesitation, no drama. Just the decisive translation of assessment into action that she had been trained to perform and had performed 800 times in conditions that made a diner in Kentucky look serene by comparison. She watched the moment she hit the floor, the spread of dark through the fabric of her scrub pants. She watched her own hand press against the wound while the rest of her stayed focused on the door. She turned the phone off and set it down. She had been lying there for 40 minutes, looking at the ceiling and doing the work of maintaining internal quiet, when Corporal Dominic Vega knocked on the doorframe the second time. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. The kind of coffee that was technically coffee in the way that a house fire is technically warm. He set one on the tray beside her without asking and sat in the chair that was becoming his chair. I called my unit, he said, last night. Told him what happened. I know, I heard you in the hallway. He looked at his cup. Major Chen was the duty officer. She listened to the whole thing and then she said, give me her name. Morgan said nothing. I told her Morgan Cole. She ran it, came back empty. He looked up. Then she said, try Calloway. The name landed in the room the way names do when they have weight behind them. Morgan held his gaze. She did not ask who had told Chen. She already knew what the answer would reveal. There are people coming, Vega said, from Lejeune, not because anyone ordered them, because they heard. He watched her carefully, the way young men who have learned things the hard way watch older people, looking for permission or prohibition. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt is driving up herself. I don't need an escort. It's not about need, he said simply. It's about the kind of thing you do when someone saves your life and then gets thrown to the wolves for doing it. Morgan looked at him for a long moment. He was 24 years old and sitting in that chair with the specific gravity of someone who had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it. You don't know what you're getting involved in, she said. No, he said, but I know who I'm getting involved in it for. She did not answer that. There was no useful answer for it. Instead, she reached for the coffee and took a sip, and it was as bad as she had expected. And she drank it anyway because the alternative was continuing to be the kind of person who refused everything offered from a place of genuine intention, and she was tired of being that person. 40 miles away in a conference room at the senator's district office in Lexington, Arthur Kane sat at the head of a 12-seat table with 3 people who were paid to anticipate problems and 1 person who was paid to solve them. The solving person was speaking. Kane was listening with the particular quality of attention that powerful men develop over decades. Total focus combined with total stillness, like something that has no reason to move because it has nowhere it needs to go. The video is circulating on every platform, the solving person said, currently trending in 22 states. The narrative being established is decorated combat veteran, current nurse, acts instinctively to save Marine's life. He paused. That is a very difficult narrative to compete with directly. Kane moved a pen from one side of his notepad to the other. The PTSD angle, the solving person continued, is available if we choose to use it. Decorated service, but documented psychological impact of combat. There are questions about whether her judgment in high-stress situations is reliably sound, whether she saw a genuine threat or reacted to a perceived threat through the lens of past trauma. The room was quiet. I will not use that angle, Kane said. The solving person stopped. She saved a Marine's life, Kane said. Whoever she is, whatever else she may be connected to, she did that. And I will not stand in front of a camera and tell the families of veterans that their people's trauma is a disqualification. He looked at the table. Find another approach. The pause that followed was the pause of professionals recalculating. The hospital situation, one of the other people said carefully, Holloway's termination move creates a public antagonist. If the story becomes decorated veteran fired for heroism, that is significantly worse than the current narrative. Then Holloway doesn't terminate her, Kane said. Holloway may already be moving. Then someone calls Holloway and explains the current situation to him clearly, Kane said. He looked at the solving person. That seems like a use of your time. The solving person made a note. What we need, Kane said, is patience. He stood, which was the signal that the meeting was ending. The story has a natural arc. It peaks, it breaks, the public finds something else. We monitor, we observe, we do not create new antagonists. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at no one in particular, and we find out who she actually is. He walked out. The solving person's phone was already in his hand before the door closed. He typed a single name into the search field, Morgan Calloway, then a second field, Raymond Holt, DOJ. Back in the third-floor room at Harlan County Memorial, Morgan heard them before she saw them. The sound was the elevator doors on the north end of the hall, then footsteps, then more footsteps, with the particular rhythm of people who move together without having to think about it. Not hurrying, not casual, just coordinated in the way that some people simply are. Vega stood up from his chair without appearing to think about it. The door opened and Lieutenant Colonel Diana Merritt walked into the room. She was 43 years old and carried the kind of physical authority that has nothing to do with size. Medium height, iron gray hair worn close. The eyes of someone who had made decisions she would carry the rest of her life and had made peace with that through the only method that actually works, which is continuing to make the right decisions forward. She wore her dress uniform because she had driven here from Camp Lejeune and had not stopped to change. And the uniform in this context was not ceremony, it was a statement of position. She stopped 3 feet from the bed, looked at Morgan the way Morgan imagined someone looks at a thing they have been searching for across a significant distance of time. Calloway, she said. Morgan looked back. I stopped using that name. I know. Merritt's voice was level. I've been looking for you for 26 months. The room was very quiet. Why, Morgan said. Operation Blackthorn Review Board, Merritt said. Final ruling came down 8 weeks after the engagement. Cleared on all counts. Commended for tactical decision-making under extreme conditions. Recommended for promotion to HM1. She pulled a folder from under her arm and set it on the bed. They needed you present to receive the formal findings. You had already disappeared. She looked at Morgan directly. You were cleared, Calloway. You need to hear that from someone who was in the room. Morgan looked at the folder, did not open it. 8 people, she said. Yes, Merritt sat down, not in the chair but on the edge of the window ledge, close enough to speak at normal volume but not so close it felt like crowding. 8 people chose to stay. 14 people came home because of the decision you made. The review board understood that. I need you to understand that they understood that. Morgan's hands were flat on the blanket over her legs. Merritt waited. She had the patience of someone who had learned that some silences need to be allowed to exist without being fixed. After a time, Morgan said, Why are you here today? Not the other thing. Today. Because one of my Marines is alive, Merritt said, and the woman who kept him alive is being set up to take a fall for it. She looked at the window. I have 23 Marines in the hallway who drove through the night and asked me how they could help. I told them to be present, be visible, and be loud if someone tries to make this anything other than what it is. She looked back at Morgan. What it is someone doing the job they were trained to do for no reason other than that it needed doing. Morgan said nothing for a long moment. Then, Holloway's moving to terminate me. I heard, Merritt said. He won't. You don't know that. I know that this morning every camera in the country is pointed at this building. And if Edward Holloway walks out that front door and fires the woman who just saved a Marine's life, what follows him for the rest of his professional existence will make whatever he's trying to protect look small by comparison. Merritt almost smiled. He'll make a calculation. He's that kind of man. A knock at the door. Carrie Sutton walked in without waiting for an answer. She was 38 years old and had the compact, undemonstrative physicality of someone who had trained their body to be a reliable instrument rather than an impressive one. Dark jacket, no jewelry, a bag over one shoulder that Morgan recognized from the old days as carrying more options than most people thought a bag that size could hold. She had been on a plane from Denver since 7 that morning, and it showed nowhere except in the slight tightness around her eyes. She looked at Morgan. Morgan looked at her. No, Morgan said. I already booked the return for Sunday, Carrie said. So I have 4 days. She dropped the bag near the wall, looked at Merritt. Diana. Sutton. Merritt's tone had the compression of a word that means several things at once. Carrie sat in Vega's chair. Vega, who had not been introduced, stood slightly straighter in the way of young men who sense that they are in the presence of credentials they cannot yet fully read. You look terrible, Carrie said to Morgan. I was shot at this morning. Yesterday morning. It's been a full day. Carrie looked at her steadily. You weren't going to call me. No, because you thought you could handle it. Morgan met her eyes. I can handle it. You can, Carrie said. That has never been the question. There was a history in that exchange that did not require narration. The kind of shorthand that develops between people who have shared conditions that most people only read about, and who have made and failed to make certain choices in those conditions, and who have been close enough to each other's worst moments to be able to speak in the compressed language of people who do not need to explain the backstory. Morgan looked at her hands, then at Merritt, then at the door. What's happening out front, she said. Media, Vega said. National. 3 satellite trucks when we pulled in. And Holloway? Merritt said. He is currently in the lobby giving what he describes as a statement of concern. His language is very careful. He's not attacking you directly. He's expressing the hospital's commitment to reviewing all incidents involving staff in order to ensure the highest standards of patient safety. That is a very elegant way of making me the problem, Morgan said. Yes, Merritt agreed, it is. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then she said very calmly, I want to go downstairs. Merritt looked at her. Your leg is mine, Morgan said. I'll manage it. She looked at Vega. Get the wheelchair. He got the wheelchair. The lobby of Harlan County Memorial at 9:20 in the morning was not large enough for what had accumulated inside it. 3 camera crews, 7 reporters with phones extended, hospital security trying to maintain a perimeter that the room's dimensions made geometric fiction. And at the center, in front of a small table someone had dragged over to function as a podium, Edward Holloway, standing in his Navy vest, speaking in the measured tones of a man who was very confident about the story he was telling. When the elevator doors opened, and the sound of 23 sets of dress boots on tile preceded Morgan's wheelchair into the lobby, Holloway's sentence did not quite finish. Merritt walked at Morgan's right. Carrie Sutton walked at her left. Vega pushed the chair. The other Marines formed up behind them without signal or command, the kind of coordinated movement that happens when the people involved have all spent years moving in response to the same sets of stimuli. The cameras found them immediately. Holloway's expression rearranged itself into something that was performing concern and not quite reaching it. Ms. Calloway, he said, you should be resting. You are explaining your commitment to patient safety, Morgan said. Please continue. The room's particular silence is worth describing. It was not quiet. There were monitors beeping in the ER bay visible through the double doors and the ambient hum of a large building doing its work. But the human sound had left the room, the way human sound leaves a room when the people in it become collectively uncertain about what is about to happen. Holloway looked at the cameras, then at Morgan, then at the 23 Marines standing at attention behind her. Merritt spoke before he could reorganize. Petty Officer First Class Morgan Calloway, she said, and her voice carried in the way voices carry when the person using them is accustomed to being heard across significant distances in significant noise. HM 8404, Fleet Marine Force Corpsman, 3 tours in Helmand Province, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Combat Medical Badge. She turned to the cameras. This is the woman this hospital's administration has been attempting to silence since 6 hours after she saved a Marine's life. Holloway said quietly and dangerously, Lieutenant Colonel, this is a private personnel matter. It stopped being private when you walked out here with cameras, Merritt said, and it stopped being a personnel matter when you handed her an NDA at her bedside. The cameras were very active. Morgan looked at Holloway from the wheelchair. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The geometry of the room had already said it for her. Dana Wyrick was in the corner of the lobby, not pointing a camera at Merritt, not pointing a camera at Morgan, pointing it at Holloway's right hand, which was moving toward his jacket pocket, which contained his phone, and which had been moving toward that phone repeatedly since the moment the elevator doors opened. She was recording the direction of his attention. Not the speech, the tells. Holloway's hand stopped. He looked at the assembled scene. He made a calculation, the kind of calculation Morgan had predicted to Merritt an hour ago. And the calculation came out against him on every axis, and it showed in the 2-second pause before he spoke. The hospital values every member of its staff, he said. We are grateful for Ms. Calloway's service and wish her a full recovery. He straightened his jacket. He walked toward the exit with the deliberate unhurry of a man who needed very badly to make a phone call and was not going to do it in this room. The exit door closed behind him. Morgan watched it close. Then she looked at Vega and said, "Take me back upstairs. We have work to do." Outside the building, the morning was doing what mornings in the national media cycle do when they find a story with the right combination of elements. The footage from the Kettle Fork Diner had everything the algorithm favored: genuine danger, genuine response, genuine consequence, and a character at its center that no one had been able to fully categorize yet, which meant every corner of the internet was attempting to do that work simultaneously. A retired Army Ranger in Georgia posted a 12-second clip of Morgan's movement across the diner on repeat with the caption, "That is not a civilian reaction. That is 15 years of muscle memory." And he was right, and the clip had 800,000 shares by noon. A cable news panel convened to discuss whether the nursing profession had failed to provide adequate psychological support for veterans in its workforce. The panel did not include any nurses or any veterans. A congressman from Virginia issued a statement praising the heroism of the Marine. He did not mention the nurse. 3 separate accounts on social media posted Morgan's home address within 2 hours of each other, using information sourced from a data broker that charged $11 for a background check. The posts were removed. The information was already loose in the world, the way information becomes once it has been released, impossible to recall, circulating through channels that deletion cannot reach. Merritt, who had spent 20 years being aware of security environments, looked at the parking lot from the 3rd-floor window and made 2 phone calls. Vega, who was 24 years old and had grown up in a world where the internet was ambient, sat in the hallway and watched the number on the video climb and felt something complex that he did not have the language for yet, which was the particular feeling of being both grateful and afraid on behalf of someone else. And somewhere in Lexington, in an office with good lighting and better security, Arthur Kane read a 3-paragraph summary from his communications director and made a decision that would take 3 days to reach its consequences, by which time the shape of everything would have changed. The attack came at 2:17 in the morning. It came the way serious things come, not with announcement or visible buildup, but with a single wrong detail preceding it by seconds. The kind of detail that a person without Morgan's particular history would have filed and forgotten, but that her nervous system received and processed as the signal it was. The detail was footsteps. Merritt had posted 2 Marines outside the room before she settled in the chair at the end of the hall for the night. Their names were Corporal Aaron Reeves and Corporal James Fowler, both from Camp Lejeune, both vouched for by Merritt personally, both with the kind of steady profiles that had made them the obvious choice for overnight watch. Reeves walked a pattern. It was small and regular and unconscious. 4 steps east, 4 steps west, the way people in confined spaces create movement to stay alert. Morgan had cataloged it without knowing she was cataloging it, the way she cataloged all the ambient sounds of an environment she was sleeping in. What she heard at 2:17 was different. She was not fully asleep. She had not been fully asleep in any meaningful sense since the morning before. She was in the gray space between monitoring and rest that she had occupied for most of her time in Helmand, when the distinction between sleeping and being awake had dissolved because the cost of fully surrendering consciousness was too high. Carrie was in the corner, also not asleep. Her eyes opened at the same moment Morgan's did. "Wrong rhythm," Morgan said very quietly. Carrie was already moving. The door opened before either of them reached it. Reeves came in first, then Fowler. Their weapons were not drawn in the way of men performing a security check. They were drawn in the way of men who had already decided what they were there to do. The thing that happened in the next 20 seconds is difficult to render at normal narrative speed because it did not occur at normal narrative speed. It occurred at the speed that trained bodies move when trained bodies are the only resource available, which is faster than it looks from the outside and slower than it feels from the inside. Carrie moved on Fowler without any of the hesitation that the word move typically implies. She had MARSOC training from a period of her life that she did not discuss in detail. In MARSOC training at the level she had received, it means that the interval between recognizing a threat and neutralizing it is not measured in seconds, but in something smaller. Fowler was a large man and a trained Marine, and it did not matter. He went down in the space of a single breath with the controlled economy of force that is the specific product of learning to handle larger opponents in the dark with no backup and no margin. Reeves had his weapon on Carrie. Morgan threw her crutch. She was not aiming at anything vital. She was aiming at the disruption of Reeves' attention, which is a different target and a more reliable one, and the crutch connected with his forearm in the moment his finger was tightening and the shot went into the floor tile, and Reeves, to his credit in his failure, did not break as dramatically as a civilian would have. He recovered. He turned toward Morgan, and the door behind him came off its hinges. Not literally, but Merritt arrived with 3 Marines at the speed of someone who had been sitting in the hallway for 5 hours waiting for the sound of something wrong, and the room went from unresolvable to resolved in the time it takes to say it. Reeves on the floor, Fowler conscious but restrained. A third man Morgan had not seen before, not a Marine, not in any uniform she recognized, caught in the doorway with equipment that had no legitimate hospital purpose, now face down on the tile with Vega's knee between his shoulder blades. 3 more men from the stairwell entrance. People of Delray's, professional in the way Delray's people had apparently been trained to be, not the panicked amateurs from the diner, but something harder and more deliberate. They came in tactical formation and found that the formation was already occupied by Marines who had been awake and alert and positioned, because Merritt had spent her career being right about these things. The fight was not brief in the way movies portray brief fights. It was loud and close and involved furniture and the particular sounds of people who are seriously trying to stop other people from doing things. Morgan, whose leg had already informed her that tonight was not a night for heroics, stayed behind the overturned bed frame and cataloged the room and used the one long piece of metal she had found in the first 2 seconds, the IV pole, to handle the person who got past Carrie. When it ended, the room looked like what it was. Merritt stood in the center of it with the specific stillness of a commanding officer taking account of her position after contact, looking at each person in sequence, confirming status, confirming threat level, confirming what the next required action was. She looked at Reeves, restrained against the wall, then at Fowler. "Who paid you?" she said. Reeves looked at the floor. Her voice did not change. "Who paid you?" The answer, when it came, was not a name Morgan had expected. It was not Kane. It was not Delray directly, though the chain ran through Delray's network. It was a number, a transfer authorization, traced in the subsequent investigation to one of the shell companies in Holloway's billing architecture. Holloway moving independently, not following orders, protecting himself. Morgan heard the name and understood immediately what it meant. The structure she was inside of was not a pyramid with one person at the top issuing unified commands. It was a web, with multiple nodes operating on their own interests, connected by money and fear and mutual necessity. Holloway was not Kane's instrument tonight. He was his own. That made it more dangerous, not less. Merritt was already on her radio. Morgan looked at Carrie, who had a cut above her left eye that she was choosing to ignore, and Carrie looked back, and between them passed the specific communication of people who have trained for exactly this and are now on the other side of it, which is a kind of recognition that does not require language. "You need a doctor," Morgan said. "I know a good one," Carrie said. Morgan almost smiled. It was small and it was brief, and it was the first time her face had done that in days, but it was real. Agent Sandra Cho arrived from the FBI's Louisville field office at 11:40 that morning. She was 41 years old and worked in financial crimes with the specific patience of someone who had learned that money, unlike people, always tells the truth if you read it slowly enough. She came alone, with a briefcase, and she sat down in the room's third chair and opened the briefcase and placed a single manila folder on the tray table. She looked at Morgan. She looked at Dana, who was present because Morgan had asked her to be. She looked at Carrie, who was present because no one had successfully asked her not to be. She looked at Vega in the corner. "Tyler Kane," Cho said, "made contact with the FBI's Lexington office 11 weeks ago." Dana stopped writing. "He was not acting voluntarily in the robbery," Cho continued. "His participation was coerced. Marcus Delray, who led the operational team, obtained photographic and video evidence of Tyler at a location connected to Delray's network. Tyler had been attempting to document Delray's activities on behalf of the FBI following an earlier voluntary contact. Delray discovered this. He used the evidence to force Tyler's compliance with the robbery in order to compromise him and ensure his silence." Morgan was very still. For 6 weeks before yesterday morning, Cho said, Tyler had been providing us with operational details about Delray's crew, including Delray's connection to a larger financial network. He was building a case from the inside while being coerced into participating from the outside. She looked at Morgan. Yesterday's robbery was designed by Delray to test Tyler's loyalty. He was required to participate visibly in a violent crime in front of witnesses, eliminating his credibility as an informant and tying him permanently to the criminal operation. The young man at the diner door, Morgan said. Before he ran, he turned back. Cho nodded. We believe he recognized you. Not personally, professionally. Your movement, your response. He understood what you were. And he understood that if someone with your background was present and survived, and if Tyler survived without killing anyone, there was a chance this could resolve differently than Delray intended. He was counting on me. He was hoping for you, Cho said. There is a distinction. The room was quiet. Then Dana said carefully was. Cho held her gaze. Tyler Kane was found at approximately 6 this morning, Cho said. A former equipment storage facility on County Road 11, Marcus Delray. He had determined that Tyler was cooperating with law enforcement. The method was quick. Tyler would not have known what was coming. No one spoke for a moment. Morgan looked at her hands. She thought about the photograph Dana had shown her the previous night. The nervous eyes, the expression of someone perpetually bracing. A 23-year-old man who had tried to do the right thing from the inside of a situation that had no clean exits and had paid the price that situations without clean exits often exact. Who knew Tyler was talking to you, Morgan said. That is the central question. Cho looked at her steadily. The number of people who had access to Tyler's informant status is limited. Our internal review is active. But there is a secondary question that bears on your situation specifically, and that is the question of who informed Delray that Tyler had been compromised. She paused. We have reason to believe that information came through Edward Holloway. Dana set her pen down. Holloway was not directing Delray, Cho said. Their relationship is transactional. Holloway became aware through his own channels that Tyler had been in contact with law enforcement. This information reached him through the financial network, which operates on a need-to-know basis above Holloway's level. When he learned that Tyler might expose the billing operations, he passed that information forward. He did not anticipate or direct the result, but the result is what it is. So Holloway and Delray are connected, Dana said, but they're not operating together. They are connected through a structure that neither of them fully understands. Cho's voice was careful and precise. There is a third level above both of them. That level is what we are actually investigating. Holloway is an instrument. Delray is an instrument. The architecture they operate inside of is what we need. Morgan looked at her. You're here because you need something from me. Yes, she waited. You have been inside Harlan County Memorial for 4 years, Cho said. During that time, you observed billing anomalies. We know this because Tyler described a conversation in which Holloway mentioned an internal nurse who had asked questions about vendor invoices in the spring of last year. Holloway described her as observant. His word. She paused. We need to know what you saw and more specifically, whether you documented any of it. Morgan thought about the notebook. Small black cover, the size of her palm. She had carried it for 4 years the way she carried most things she could not explain the reason for, because the habit of documentation had been built into her too deeply to discard even when she had discarded everything else. The notebook was at her apartment, in the box under the bed that she had been adding to for 4 years without examining why. I need to think about what I'm agreeing to, Morgan said. Cho nodded. That's reasonable. How long do I have? Cho looked at her without blinking. You have until Delray decides you are the same kind of problem Tyler was. The sentence fell into the room and stayed there. Outside in the hallway, one of the Marines shifted position. The sound of boots on linoleum was, in the particular silence that followed Cho's sentence, something between presence and promise. The remainder of the afternoon moved with the compressed unreality of days when too many things of significance happen in sequence. 3 reporters found the direct number for Morgan's hospital room and called it. She did not answer. An attorney from a firm in Nashville left a voicemail saying he had been retained by the hospital board and would like to discuss a mutual resolution. She did not call back. A woman from a veterans organization left a message saying they were organizing a statement of support and would appreciate a quote. She thought about that one longer than the others and still did not call back. Merritt spent 2 hours in the hospital's administrative conference room with 2 members of the board, and whatever was said in that room, Holloway did not appear again for the rest of the day. At 4 in the afternoon, Dana knocked on the door and came in with her laptop and the expression of someone who has found something they were not entirely looking for. "I need to show you something," Dana said. She sat on the foot of the bed and opened the screen and pulled up a recording. It was a press conference, well-lit professional backdrop. Senator Arthur Kane at a podium. He was wearing a dark tie and the expression of a man who had dressed carefully for grief. "He's making a statement about Tyler," Dana said. "His nephew." She pressed play. Kane's voice on the recording was measured and low. Genuine loss, or its precise imitation, which in a man of his experience might be indistinguishable. "My family has suffered a devastating loss," he said. "Tyler struggled. We tried to help him. We failed. And now he is gone, and I am left trying to understand how the environment that claimed him was allowed to develop in a county I have represented for 12 years. He looked directly at the camera. "I am calling for a comprehensive federal review of law enforcement coordination in Appalachian counties, and I am personally funding a task force to examine the conditions that make young men vulnerable to criminal exploitation." Morgan watched the screen. "He is funding the investigation of the problem he created," she said. "He is stepping in front of it," Dana said. "Controlling the narrative before anyone else can." She looked at Morgan. "Here's the part I need you to see." She fast-forwarded to a question from a reporter. "Senator, do you have any comment on the viral video involving the Harlan County nurse?" Kane's expression shifted into something that was carefully arranged to look unguarded. "It is a genuinely remarkable story," he said, "an extraordinary woman who clearly has deep training and deep courage. But I also want to say, as someone who has spent years working on veterans issues, that the manner of her response raises questions that deserve compassionate attention. Not punitive attention, compassionate attention. When someone with a combat history reacts with that level of intensity to a civilian situation, that tells us something about what they are still carrying." He paused. "I hope she gets the support she needs." Dana stopped the recording. "He's not attacking you," she said. "He's medicalizing you." Morgan said nothing. "He's building a foundation," Dana continued, "so that when your testimony becomes inconvenient, the groundwork is already laid for suggesting it comes from a compromised source, a damaged source. He never has to call you a liar. He just has to have already called you fragile." Morgan looked at the paused image on the screen. Kane's face, mid-sentence, in the particular expression of a man performing empathy for an audience. "He's done this before," Morgan said. "Many times," Dana said. "He's had 12 years to get good at it." Morgan looked at the ceiling, at the window, at her hands. "The notebook is at my apartment," she said. "Under the bed, black cover, 4 years of irregularities. I need someone to go get it." Dana looked at her steadily. "I'll go now," she said. She left. Carrie, who had been sitting in the corner for the last hour in the specific silence of someone who is choosing to wait rather than being forgotten, said, "You should know he's had people watching this building since noon." "Holloway," Morgan said. "Kane Burn." She said it simply, not as alarm, just as information. "Gray sedan on the east side of the lot has moved twice. Same plates both times, not FBI, not local." She paused. "Someone in a position to want to know what you're doing is watching to find out." Morgan thought about that. Then she said, "And you've been watching them since this morning," Carrie said. "Yes." Morgan looked at her. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because you needed to make decisions without factoring in the surveillance," Carrie said. "If you knew you were being watched, you'd have adjusted your behavior to account for it, and they'd have learned from the adjustment." She met Morgan's eyes without apology. "I let them watch someone dealing with what she appears to be dealing with. That's a different thing to observe than someone who knows she's being observed." The logic of it was clean and cold, and exactly the kind of operational reasoning Morgan recognized from a context very different from a hospital room. "You're still working," Morgan said. "I never stopped," Carrie said simply. A knock at the door. Vega put his head in. "The FBI agent is asking to come back. She says there's a development." "Send her in," Morgan said. Cho came in with the manila folder held against her chest and the expression of someone managing information carefully, because there is a correct order in which it should be delivered. "We have an identification," she said, "for the source inside the DOJ who has been providing your location and the status of our investigation to parties outside the FBI." She paused. "His name is Raymond Holt, Deputy Assistant United States Attorney. He has held his current position for 9 years. She looked at Morgan. "He has been providing information to Senator Kane's network for approximately 5 of those years, based on the financial trail we have now traced. She set the folder on the tray. We believe he identified you. We believe he connected your presence at this hospital under a false name with information in sealed DOJ files about Operation Blackthorn and the circumstances of your discharge. Morgan was very quiet. He told Kane who I was, she said. He confirmed what Kane suspected, Cho said. There's a distinction there that will matter later. She looked at Morgan directly. He also has been providing live updates on your location and the status of our investigation, which means that everything we have discussed in this room today, Cho said, has been communicated to Senator Kane within approximately 2 hours of its occurrence. The room's temperature did not change, but something in it did. Then everything I've told you, Morgan said. He knows. Yes, and the notebook, Morgan said. If Donna goes to my apartment, Cho's expression answered the question before her voice did. Carrie was already on her feet. I'll call Dana, she said, and she was out the door before the sentence fully ended. Morgan looked at Cho. She had not fully absorbed the Raymond Holt information yet. She was holding it at a slight distance the way you hold something hot, aware of it, not yet touching the center of it. She had lived for 4 years under an identity she had constructed carefully, believing that the people who knew her real name could be counted on one hand and that all of those hands were trustworthy. Raymond Holt's name disassembled that belief from the foundation. Someone inside the federal system had been watching her, had known where she was, had been reporting her location to the man whose name on a radio dial had made her hand move before her mind could stop it. The question she had asked Dana the previous night, the one Dana had not been able to answer, was now answering itself in the worst possible configuration. Before she could continue that thought, Cho opened the briefcase to its second layer of documents. I want to show you the broader picture, Cho said, because you need to understand what you are involved in before you decide how to respond to it. The documents she placed on the tray were financial diagrams. Not charts in the colorful presentation sense, but the dense, cross-referenced architecture of money flowing through constructed channels. Morgan had seen tactical maps. She had seen casualty assessment diagrams. The financial network Cho placed before her had the same quality of those things. The quality of something designed to be navigated rather than admired. A working document for people who needed to move through it. 11 hospitals, Cho said. Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, all rural, all under-resourced, all with COOs or CFOs who had been recommended for their positions, directly or indirectly, through relationships traceable to Senator Arthur Kane's political network. His campaign donors, his committee work. Morgan looked at the diagram. The money enters the system through inflated billing, Cho continued. Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. Vendor invoices for services not rendered and equipment not delivered. The revenue is categorized as legitimate hospital income. It passes through the hospital's operating accounts. Portions of it are redirected through subcontractor relationships to companies that exist on paper only, then move through a series of holding entities in 3 states before arriving at investment vehicles that Kane controls through proxies. She pointed to a note on the diagram. Harlan County Memorial, Morgan's hospital. 4 years of her working life. 4 years of patient care in a building that was processing someone else's dirty money through its own bloodstream. Total network revenue over 6 years, Cho said, approximately $67 million. The source funds come from drug trafficking operations in the Appalachian Corridor. Kane's network provides the laundering infrastructure. The hospitals provide the legitimate-looking channel. Morgan did not look up from the diagram. She was thinking about Roy Decker. She had been thinking about Roy Decker intermittently since the previous night, and she was thinking about him now in specific and concrete terms. 67 years old, retired coal miner, black lung diagnosis. He had come to the ER in February with a cardiac episode that turned out to be a combination of medication side effects and the kind of stress that comes from choosing between rent and prescriptions. She had treated him. She had watched the billing supervisor generate his invoice and had noticed, without intending to, that the cardiac monitoring codes applied to his file included procedures that had not been performed because the equipment to perform them was not in the building, was in fact on an order that had been canceled the previous year. She had asked about it. She had been told it was a coding error under review. Roy Decker had died in July. She had seen his name in the paper, survived by his wife, Darlene, and 2 daughters. Services at a church on Highway 421. $47,000 in fraudulent billing on his account alone. Money that had left the system before it could pay for the care of people like him, redirected through shell companies, arriving eventually in the investment portfolio of a United States senator who was currently on camera expressing his deep concern for vulnerable communities. The rage that moved through Morgan when she connected these points completely was not dramatic. It did not express itself in her face or her posture. It went somewhere interior, somewhere architectural, the way very serious things go when a person has learned to metabolize them without letting them ignite uncontrolled. She set the diagram down. Kane sits on the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee for Rural Health, she said. Yes, Cho confirmed. He has for 6 years. He has full visibility into CMS audit schedules, federal healthcare fraud task force activities, and regional law enforcement coordination. He has used that visibility to ensure that the network's operations occur in the gaps between enforcement cycles. He built the oversight mechanism that makes him impossible to oversee, Morgan said. That is an accurate characterization. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Holloway is not the architect, she said. He's just a wall. Cho nodded. Holloway is useful to Kane because he is already corrupt, already motivated by self-protection, and already positioned inside a facility that is central to the network. He did not need to be recruited. He needed to be discovered and leveraged. She paused. His independent action last night, the attack on you, was not sanctioned by Kane. It was Holloway protecting his own exposure. The two of them are not partners. They are codependent antagonists who happen to need the same outcome right now. Which is my silence, Morgan said. Or your discrediting, Cho said, which functions equivalently. Morgan looked at Cho, then at her own hands, then at the Bronze Star citation folder, still sitting on the tray table beside her, still unopened, still waiting. What do you need me to do? Cho sat down. For the first time since entering the room, she set the folder aside and spoke without looking at it. We need you to be willing to testify, she said, not just about the diner, not just about Holloway, about everything, the billing irregularities, what you observed over 4 years, the pressure Holloway applied, your interaction with Kane's network as you understand it, the full picture. Morgan said, Kane will spend the next 6 months building a narrative that I'm unreliable, damaged, seeing things through a trauma lens that distorts reality. He will try, Cho agreed. And you need me to testify anyway. Yes, why does it have to be me? Cho looked at her. Because Tyler is gone. Because Holloway is protecting himself and will only go so far. Because the financial evidence alone builds a case but not a story, and juries need a story. She paused. And because you have 4 years of handwritten documentation of billing irregularities that you created without knowing why, which is the most credible kind of evidence that exists. Evidence that was not created for a courtroom. Evidence that was created because the person writing it couldn't help noticing what was wrong. She thought about the 8 names from Blackthorn. She had been carrying them for 4 years in the way you carry a thing you believe is your punishment. And she was only beginning to understand that punishment and responsibility are not the same weight, even when they feel identical from the inside. She thought about Tyler Kane, 23 years old, who had tried to get something right from the worst possible position, who had not survived it, who had looked back at the diner door before running, and whose eyes had held something she now understood completely. Not relief at escaping. Relief that someone was still standing. She thought about Vega in the waiting room for 6 hours, not going anywhere. She thought about Roy Decker's wife, Darlene, survived by 2 daughters, a church on Highway 421. She set the diagram down. She looked at Cho. I'll testify, Morgan said. There was no drama in the way she said it, no resolution music. Just a woman stating a decision she had already made and was now confirming out loud. Cho nodded once. Then she opened her briefcase and began. The night came down over Harlan County, the way it always came down, without consultation or ceremony, the mountains simply absorbing the remaining light until there was none left. In the room on the 3rd floor, the overhead fluorescence had been dimmed, and the monitors cast their small green glow across the bed where Morgan sat propped against the pillow, the unopened Bronze Star citation folder on the table beside her. She had not opened it. She was not ready to open it tonight, but she had stopped moving it to the far side of the tray and had left it within arm's reach, which was a different kind of statement. Vega had gone to find food. Cho had left with instructions and a promise to return in the morning. Merritt was in the hallway doing the thing Merritt did, which was being present and accountable and in motion. Carrie sat in the corner. Morgan looked at her. She had been sitting there for 3 hours and had said 4 things. "You should have told me," Morgan said. 4 years ago. Whatever you knew, you should have told me." Carrie looked at the floor. "I didn't know about Kane," she said. "I knew you needed to disappear, and I helped you disappear, and I thought that was enough. It was enough for a while. I know. Then it wasn't. I know that too." Morgan looked at the window. The dark outside. The particular dark of mountains that does not have the ambient orange glow of cities but is instead complete, the way darkness used to be before it learned to apologize for itself. "You put the recording device on me in the hospital room last night," Morgan said, "when you touched my shoulder." A long pause. "Yes," Carrie said. Morgan turned to look at her. "I knew you would leave at some point," Carrie said. "I knew you would try to do something alone. I know how you operate. I've known for a long time." She met Morgan's eyes. "If Kane came to you directly, I wanted a record that couldn't be challenged. A record that didn't require you to be believed. Just one that required him to be heard." Morgan looked at her for a long time without speaking. "You didn't ask me," she said finally. "No," Carrie said, "I didn't. Because you knew I'd say no. Because I knew you'd say no." Another silence. Then Morgan said, "Is it still running?" Carrie looked at her phone. "No, I stopped it when Cho confirmed the DOJ leak. The chain of custody becomes complicated if the FBI needs it." She put the phone away. "But I have the file, and I know exactly how to use it if the time comes." Morgan looked back at the window. "The time is coming," she said. "That's what tonight is." Carrie said nothing. From the hallway, through the crack under the door, came the sound of Merritt's voice on the phone, low and quick and deliberate. The voice of someone who is deploying something and knows it will take. And from the window, from the direction of the parking lot 4 stories below, came the distant sound of a car engine starting. Not leaving. Just turning over in the dark. The way an engine turns over when a person has nowhere to go but wants to be ready. Someone was still watching. Morgan looked at the engine sound in the dark. She was not afraid. She was past afraid. Fear was for people who still believed they had something left to lose by being visible. And she had spent the last 36 hours surrendering that belief one layer at a time, until what remained underneath was not resignation, but something sharper. Clarity. The particular clarity of a person who has finally stopped running from the thing they were built to run toward. Tomorrow she would go to the warehouse. Tomorrow she would bring everything she had kept. And she would be there when whoever was in that car decided to follow her. Carrie said nothing. She was already watching the window. She left the hospital at 3 in the morning. Not in fear. Not in secret. She told Vega she was going, and he looked at her with the expression of a young man who has learned enough to understand when a conversation has already been decided and the asking would only waste both their time. He put the rental car keys in her hand without being asked. She looked at the keys for a moment. She took them. Merritt was in the hallway, awake, which was not surprising. The woman seemed to treat sleep the way she treated most things that fell outside her direct control, with professional tolerance but no real expectation. "I cannot stop you," Merritt said. "No," Morgan agreed. "I can put someone behind you." Morgan looked at her. "Behind me. Not with me." Merritt held her gaze. 200 yards. "You will not know they are there unless you need them." She paused. "And if you need them, you will know immediately." Morgan nodded once. That was the arrangement. Not protection in the sense of supervision. Protection in the sense of backup, which she had always been willing to accept in the field because backup was different from control, and she had never confused the two. She drove east on Route 421, then north on a county road that did not appear on the maps the county printed for visitors. One of those roads that existed in the knowledge of people who had lived in Harlan long enough rather than in any official record. 12 miles from the hospital, an industrial park that had been industrial until 2009 and had been becoming something else ever since. The kind of slow conversion that happens when an economy changes faster than the buildings built to serve it. The end unit in the last row had been empty long enough that the owner had accepted a monthly cash arrangement and stopped asking questions about the quiet woman who used it for storage. She had established this place in the first weeks of her arrival in Harlan County, when the architecture of her new life was still being built, and she was still making the decisions that would either hold or fail over the years that followed. She had made them carefully. She had made them with the thoroughness of a person who had decided not to be found. The parking area was gravel and shadow. She stopped the car and sat for 30 seconds with the engine off. No following headlights in the mirror. No sounds except the natural sounds of the mountains at 3 in the morning, which are not silence but a different kind of speaking. She got out. The gravel under her crutch made a sound she had memorized, the specific crunch of this specific place, as familiar as the sound of her own breathing. The unit opened with a key on a ring that held three others, each one opening something she had prepared in the early months, contingencies she had built into the geography of her disappearance, the way a good corpsman built redundancy into a medical plan. If the first thing fails, you already have the second. Inside, the single overhead bulb threw yellow light over a workbench, a shelving unit she had positioned deliberately against the left wall, and behind it, on the floor, the gray plastic storage container she had added to over 4 years without being entirely certain why. She moved the shelving unit, set the container on the workbench, opened it. The notebook was on top, black cover, spiral bound, the size of a paperback novel. She opened it and read the first 3 pages and then stopped because reading it sequentially was not what she needed. She already knew every word in it. She had written every word in it, incrementally, without purpose, the way she had written everything she had ever written in operational contexts, because noticing and recording was so deeply built into her that it continued operating even when she had no tactical reason for it. The point was not the content. The point was that it existed. 47 pages of billing irregularities, vendor anomalies, administrative patterns she had noticed without understanding, and that she now, standing in this warehouse at 3 in the morning, with the full architecture of what Kane had built mapped in her mind, understood completely. She set the notebook on the container lid, reached for her phone. A single pair of headlights swept across the warehouse wall from outside. She went still. The car stopped. The engine did not. The door opened. Arthur Kane walked in. He was alone. He had dressed for this the way he dressed for everything, which was carefully and without anything that announced itself. Dark coat, no tie. The expression of a man making a professional visit that happens to occur at 3 in the morning in an industrial building, because men of his experience have learned that the expression is always more important than the circumstances. He looked at the notebook on the container. He looked at Morgan. "I want to be direct with you," he said. "It's a criticism I've received, and I've been working on it." Morgan did not move. Her weight was distributed on the crutch, and her right leg in the way she had learned was most sustainable for extended periods of uncertain duration. She looked at him with the flat assessment she applied to environments she did not yet fully understand. Kane moved to the center of the space. He stopped at a distance that communicated transaction rather than threat. She measured the distance. She also measured the geometry between herself and the door behind him, which was the only exit, and which he had placed himself between her and without appearing to intend it. He noticed her noticing. He did not move. "The people around you," he said, "are going to tell you that I need to be destroyed, that I am a man of no redemption and no complexity." He looked at the container, then at her. "I am here before they get to define the terms." He paused. "I know who you are, not the version in the news, the version behind it. 3 tours in Helmand. What happened at Blackthorn? The 8 men. What you chose in that engagement and what that choice has cost you every morning for 4 years in a town where no one knew your name." He said it without performance, without apparent manipulation. The facts, stated in the level tone of a man who has done his research and wants credit for doing it. And that was what made it dangerous. Men who perform sympathy are easier to read than men who have simply learned to sound true. "I know where you have been for 4 years, he said, "because I had someone inside the federal system who was very good at finding things." He let that sit for a moment. "Raymond Holt, DOJ. He has been keeping me informed of your location since 18 months into your time here." He was watching her face for a response. She gave him none. He continued. "Holt told me 3 days ago that the FBI had moved you, that you were at Quantico, Building B, 2nd floor, room 14, under protective custody." He looked at the notebook on the workbench. "Which is why I knew you were not here when Cho's people set up that car in the parking lot, and why I came tonight instead of any other night." Morgan looked at him. "I have never been to Quantico," she said. The sentence was flat and simple, and it landed in the room like a change in air pressure. Kane was still for 2 full seconds. He understood immediately. She could see it move through him the way understanding moves through a man who has just registered that the foundation of a plan has been incorrect from the beginning. Not panic, not collapse, the cold, quiet rearrangement of a man absorbing new information and recalculating. "Holt gave you a location," she said. "I was not at that location. She held his gaze. The FBI has known about Holt for 14 months. They have been managing what he told you. Every update he passed along about where I was, what the investigation held, what evidence existed, they wrote the script. He was not your asset, he was theirs. The warehouse was very quiet. She let it be quiet for a moment. You came here tonight, she said, because you believed I was isolated. No FBI support, no merit, no backup. A woman alone in a building with a box of documents, thinking she was the one setting the trap. She paused. You were the one walking into it. Kane looked at the door. There are two men you brought with you, she said. They were in the gray SUV at the east end of the lot. FBI secured them 11 minutes before you walked through that door. She held up her left hand. The car you heard me drive away from the hospital was tracked from the moment I left the building. She kept her voice even and factual because this was not the moment for anger. This was the moment for accuracy. You were given every reason to believe this was the right move. That was deliberate. She let him absorb that. Then she said, I came to offer you something too. The chance to hear the reason I'm not taking yours, not for your benefit, for mine, because some things deserve to be said out loud in front of the person they are about. She thought about Tyler Kane, 23 years old. The photograph Dana had shown her, nervous eyes and the expression of someone perpetually bracing. A young man who had put himself inside an impossible situation to do an honest thing and had not survived it, who had turned at the diner door before running and whose expression she had read correctly even then. Not the look of a criminal departing a crime, something closer to hope. She thought about Roy Decker, 67 years old, the billing code for cardiac monitoring equipment that was not in the building, the $47,000 invoice, the church on Highway 421, Darlene and two daughters, survived by. She thought about the 8 names she carried. She had spent 4 years treating that weight as punishment. She was beginning to understand it differently. Not punishment, responsibility. The same thing that had moved her body across a diner floor for a young Marine she had never met. You built a machine, she said, that took money from people who were already running out of options. You ran it through the places those people went for help. The hospital, the clinic, the building where Roy Decker went when his heart was failing and where the care he needed was billed and redirected before it could reach him. She kept her voice level and factual. You built that over 6 years, and when it started to come apart, you had Tyler killed because he was in the way. She looked at him directly. I am not offering you a different perspective on what that was. There is no perspective on it. There is only what it was. Kane held her gaze for a long moment. Whatever calculation he was running arrived at its conclusion in the silence. He was a man who understood finality when it was spoken to him without decoration. He turned toward the door. He was 3 steps from it when Carrie Sutton stepped through it. She came in without announcement, without urgency, with the controlled unhaste of someone who has been where she needed to be for the past 41 minutes and has simply chosen this moment to become visible. She was holding her phone at her side with the specific grip of someone maintaining a particular position for a particular reason, and she looked at Kane the way she might look at an obstacle that has just transitioned from active to resolved. 41 minutes, she said. She turned the screen toward the room. The recording application was visible. The timestamp was visible. The audio indicator showed a clean, uninterrupted waveform going back to before Kane had walked through the door. He looked at the phone. The expression on his face did not break, because men who have spent 6 decades building and maintaining a particular face do not break it in a single moment. But something beneath the expression made a structural adjustment that anyone who was paying attention could see. Morgan said, "You were never talking to only me." Agent Sandra Cho came through the door 20 seconds later. She had been in the second car in the parking lot, the one Morgan had known about and Kane had not, the one that had been there for 36 hours with a warrant that predated anything Kane's attorneys had anticipated. 3 uniformed officers followed her. She read him his rights in the level, factual voice of a woman who understands that this moment belongs to the law and not to anyone's personal satisfaction. He listened. He kept his hands visible. He did not speak. When they walked him out, he did not look at Morgan. She watched him go. She stood in the warehouse in the quiet after the cars had pulled out of the lot, and she waited to feel what she expected to feel, which was some version of completion. What she felt instead was something quieter and less legible, A settling. The way a structure settles when the load it was built to bear is finally placed on it and it finds that it is adequate. Not triumphant, just adequate. Capable of the weight. She looked at Carrie. You were in the parking lot the whole time, she said. Carrie said 200 yards, same arrangement as Merritt made. Morgan said Merritt called you before she called her own people. Yes, Carrie said it without apology. We have known each other a long time. She knew you would go. She knew you needed to go alone. She looked at Morgan steadily. And she knew I would be there whether anyone arranged it or not. Morgan looked at the notebook still on the container lid. 4 years of observation she had made without knowing what she was observing, kept without knowing why, waiting for a context she had not been able to imagine. She picked up the notebook, put it in her jacket pocket. She picked up the container. She walked toward the door. The federal prosecution moved quickly, which federal prosecutions do not often do, but this one had the advantage of 4 converging sources of evidence, each one individually sufficient and collectively overwhelming. Edward Holloway signed his cooperation agreement 12 days after his arrest. His attorneys negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony that mapped the financial architecture of Kane's network from the inside with the detail that only a man who had operated within it could provide. 17 additional pages of financial diagram, 41 months of documented transactions, the shell company structure laid out from foundation to facade. His surprise at discovering that Kane's attorneys had positioned him as the sole responsible party for the attack on Morgan was visible to everyone in the room where the agreement was signed, and it did not heal before he took the stand. Raymond Holt's cooperation came through a different channel and went deeper. He had been inside the network long enough to have built a complete internal map of it, and because the FBI had known about him for 14 months and had been carefully managing what information reached Kane through him, that map was accurate in ways that Kane had no way to anticipate. 41 federal charges across the network's full membership, 19 guilty pleas before trial began, 6 additional trials scheduled across 3 federal districts over the following 2 years. Marcus Delray was taken at a truck stop outside Bristol, Virginia, 11 days after the warehouse. He offered nothing and was offered nothing in return. The evidence supporting the charge for Tyler Kane's death existed in cell tower data, security footage, forensic chemistry, and the particular consistency of a physical crime scene that the FBI's forensic team had spent 72 hours documenting with the thoroughness of people who understood what the evidence would need to withstand. He would not see a day of freedom that Morgan would live to know about, or that her children would live to know about if she had children, which she did not and had not thought about in 4 years and was thinking about now in the way you think about things that have been placed back within the range of possible. Kane went to trial. He sat through every day of it with the composed expression that had served him for 6 decades. The expression of a man converting acceptance into something that resembled dignity, because that was all that remained available, and he was not the kind of man to surrender the last available resource without using it. Morgan testified for 4 hours across 2 days. She wore a dark blazer and a plain shirt. No jewelry. The crutch rested against the witness stand railing where the jury could see it, not as performance, but as fact. She had stopped performing around her own limitations. It was one of the things that had changed. A Kevin Marsh walked her through the timeline in the order that built the clearest structure. The billing irregularities first. 4 years of her own observations, notebook in hand, specific and dated. Then the diner, then the hospital room, Holloway at the door with the blue folder, then the attack at 217, then the warehouse and everything that had been said inside it. She answered every question in the flat, specific register of someone giving a tactical report. Exact, unembroidered. The way she had been trained to report conditions in the field, where the accuracy of the information was the only thing that mattered, and anything added for effect was a liability. When Marsh asked her to describe the billing irregularities she had documented, she read directly from the notebook. Dates, vendor codes, dollar amounts, the names of equipment that had been billed and was not in the building. She described Roy Decker's account without being asked. It was not strictly within the question's scope. Marsh let it stand. When she reached Tyler in the testimony, she paused. She had thought about how to speak about Tyler. She had spent time with it. She had decided to speak about him the way she thought about him, which was as a person, not as a casualty of the narrative, as a 23-year-old man who had placed himself inside an impossible position in order to do an honest thing and had paid the price that impossible positions reliably exact from the people inside them. He did not want to hurt anyone, she said. In the diner, he made choices under direct coercive threat that were designed to minimize harm. She looked at the jury, not at Marsh, because this part was not testimony in the legal sense. It was witness in the older sense, and it belonged to whoever was willing to hear it. He was killed for those choices by the man who ran the operation he was trying to expose. She let that sit for a moment. He deserves to be remembered for what he tried to do, not for what he was forced into. Kane's attorneys were experienced and capable, and they arrived at the witness stand with 3 prepared strategies. The first was the PTSD question, raised with the particular gentleness of people who have decided that performing compassion while dismantling a witness is more effective than open hostility. You have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, the lead attorney said. That's documented. Yes, Morgan said. PTSD can affect perception, memory, the interpretation of threatening stimuli in neutral situations. It can, she said, in certain presentations and under certain conditions, but not in yours. She looked at the attorney with the expression of someone who has already seen the end of this road. In my case, she said, PTSD has produced heightened situational awareness, difficulty sleeping, and a persistent habit of recording anomalies I observe in my environment. She paused. What it has not produced is a notebook containing 4 years of billing irregularities that match the FBI's independent financial reconstruction to within 3%. She held the attorney's gaze. If the defense would like to challenge my perception of events in the diner, I'd suggest they challenge the 14 million view video of those events that has been in evidence since day one. The attorney moved on. The second strategy was the false identity. 4 years of Morgan Cole, no such person, a woman who had concealed her own existence. The suggestion, never stated directly but constructed through questioning, that a person willing to deceive about her identity was not a reliable witness about anything else. I'll address that, Morgan said, before the framing could harden. The network Senator Kane built had a Department of Justice official inside it who located me through sealed federal files and communicated my position to Kane's team on a regular basis for an extended period. She kept her voice level. I was not concealing my identity out of evasion. I was concealing it in response to a genuine threat that the events of this trial have confirmed was exactly what it appeared to be. She looked at the jury. I was right to hide. The question is why I needed to be. The second strategy concluded. The third was the recording, chain of custody, the private citizen status of the person who made it, the legal arguments around admissibility that Kane's team had been building since the recording was disclosed. Cho's team introduced the corroborating audio from the FBI device that had been in the warehouse for 36 hours under a separate warrant. The waveforms were identical in timing. The voices were clear and matched. The legal architecture of the challenge collapsed before the afternoon recess. The lead attorney told a colleague that evening that the case had stopped being about guilt that morning. Everything that followed was about managing the sentence. On the 4th day of trial, Cho's financial analyst placed a single slide on the courtroom screen. 11 hospitals. The money flows between them, between the shell companies and Kane's proxies, and alongside the financial diagram, a column of names, not the names of defendants or attorneys or investigators, the names of patients. Real patients in real hospitals in 4 states who had received fraudulent bills, whose care had been redirected before it could reach them, who had paid in the specific ways that people with limited options pay when the institutions they trust have been hollowed out from the inside. Roy Decker's name was in the column. Morgan was in the gallery. She had been in the gallery every day. She watched Kane look at the slide. She watched him look away. The jury watched him look away. That specific moment, that specific turning of the head away from the names of the people his machine had consumed. The jury watched it, and the watching changed something in the room that did not require words. They deliberated for 9 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty on 43 of 47 counts. The remaining 4 were dismissed. The 43 included racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction, solicitation to obstruct, and accessory to the death of Tyler Kane. The judge sentenced Kane 6 weeks later, 51 years, federal facility, no parole consideration for 30 years. He would be 92 years old at the first eligible hearing. Morgan was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. She had said what she had to say under oath in a room that was built for exactly that purpose. She had no need to watch the conclusion. She already knew what the conclusion meant, and she had somewhere else to be. She was at the new building when Vega called with the verdict, 3 blocks east of the old warehouse, in a structure that had previously been a machine shop, and before that, a radio repair operation, and before that, something nobody currently in Harlan County was old enough to remember. She had been renovating it for 2 months, not alone. That was one of the things that had changed. Merritt had sent 2 Marines from Lejeune on voluntary leave who turned out to have construction experience. Vega had spent 3 weekends with a drywall knife. Dr. Olson had shown up on a Saturday with a truck from the hardware store and had worked without discussion until the light went. Carrie had designed the training layout with the same precision she applied to everything and had been right about all of it. The walls were new and painted. The floor was clean concrete with rubberized matting over the training area. Along the left wall, the trauma kit stations were mounted at the height Morgan had specified, accessible to people of varying heights and varying levels of physical capacity, because that was who the building was for. Along the right wall, the whiteboard. At the top of the whiteboard, 3 words she had written on the first day she walked in. Scene, safety, first. Vega's voice on the phone was steady when he told her the verdict. She listened to the full count. She thanked him. She set the phone on the windowsill and stood in the room that was not yet full and looked at the 3 words on the board for a long time. She thought about Tyler. She had been thinking about Tyler regularly since the night in the warehouse, and she expected she would continue to. He was one of the names now. Not one of the 8 from Blackthorn, those were their own weight and would always be. But Tyler was part of what she carried, a 23-year-old who had tried to get something right from the worst possible position and who had not survived it, and who had set in motion everything that had followed his death. She did not know whether that was consolation. She was not sure consolation was the right category for it. She just knew that she carried his name now, and that carrying it was the only form of honoring it available to her, and she intended to do it justice. She thought about Blackthorn, about the 8. She had been thinking about them differently since Merritt had sat beside her in the hospital room and said what needed to be said without making it into an occasion. Not differently in the sense of lighter, the weight had not lifted and she did not expect it to. Differently in the sense of more accurately. She had been carrying guilt and grief as though they were the same thing. They were not the same thing. Guilt is the conviction that you made the wrong choice. Grief is the acknowledgement that even the right choice cost something real. She had been paying for a crime she had not committed. What she owed was not payment, it was continuation. Moving forward with the names in her chest and doing the work that the names deserve to be connected to. Grief you carry, that is simply what is true, but you carry it forward, not in place. There is a difference between those 2 directions, and she had been going the wrong way for 4 years. Merritt arrived at the new building the evening after the verdict. She had the folder under her arm, the same folder she had carried since she first drove to Harlan County. The Bronze Star citation signed and sealed and dated 26 months ago, waiting all that time for the person it belonged to be in a room where it could be delivered. She set it on the workbench without ceremony. Stepped back. Morgan looked at it. She thought about the letter she had never opened. The one that had gone to her sister's address 6 weeks after she had stopped existing under her own name. She had not opened it because opening it would have required her to stand in a place she had decided she did not deserve to occupy. She picked up the folder. She opened it. 2 pages. The formal language of official commendation, precise and durable. The kind of language designed to remain legible across time because what it records is meant to be permanent. She read it completely. She read it a second time. She set it on the workbench. The room was quiet and something moved through it that did not have a visible form but that Merritt recognized because she had been in enough of these moments to know what they looked and did not look like. You have been carrying the wrong verdict for 4 years, Merritt said. Her voice was quiet and without theater, which was the only way the sentence could be said and mean anything. Morgan did not answer immediately. She looked at the citation. She looked at the 3 words on the whiteboard across the room. She looked at the space between them and thought about everything that had lived in that space, all the distance she had put between herself and the person those words described. I know, she said. I am working on it. Merritt nodded once. She did not say anything else. There was nothing else required. She put on her jacket and left, and that was exactly right, because some things need to be left in the room where they happen without anyone carrying them back out. The Blackthorn Initiative opened 2 weeks after that. First class, 19 people. A paramedic who had been running mountain road calls alone for 3 years with inadequate training for the scenarios he kept encountering. Two teachers from Clay County who had come together and who moved through the room as a unit in the way of people who have known each other long enough to share a language. A former sheriff's deputy who had retired on medical leave and wanted, without drama or announcement, to feel useful in the world again. Several women who had come from the far end of the county together. A veteran, 2 tours in Iraq, who had been waiting without knowing exactly what he was waiting for, and who recognized the moment he walked in that this was it. And Darlene Decker, 64 years old. She had driven 40 minutes on a cold Thursday morning because she had seen the name in the newspaper and had sat with it for 3 days before deciding to come. She came in last, found a chair at the end of the second row, and sat with her hands folded in her lap and waited. Morgan stood at the front with the crutch leaned against the wall because she no longer needed it for standing, only for distance. She looked at the 19 people who had come to learn something about helping each other survive. She looked at each of them long enough to see them, not as a group, but as individuals. She told them about the diner, not the whole story, just the 2-second window, the gap between recognition and movement, and what it meant that her body had been trained to fill that gap rather than freeze inside it. Most people, she said, believe they would act in an emergency. Most people find out when the emergency comes that their body has its own plan. She let that land. Not because they are cowards, because no one ever showed them what the body needs in order to move toward the thing instead of away from it. She looked at the room. You are here because you want to be the person who moves toward it. I am here to show you how. She taught for 3 hours. At the end of the class, Darlene Decker came to the front. She was the kind of woman these mountains produce, shaped by decades of handling what needed handling because she was the one standing in the room when it needed to be handled. Her husband, Roy, had been gone since July. She had kept the house, managed the paperwork, fielded the calls from the insurance company that had taken weeks and had told her nothing she had not already suspected, which was that something in the system that was supposed to care for Roy had not been working the way it was supposed to work. My husband, Darlene said. Roy, he was a patient at Harlan County Memorial for a long time. Morgan looked at her. I read about what was happening at the hospital, about the billing, about where the money was going. She said it simply as a woman stating facts she has already made her peace with. What happened to Roy? What happened to people like Roy? It was not your fault. She held Morgan's gaze. But I needed you to know that someone who knew him is glad you are here and glad you stayed. Morgan stood with that for a moment. The words available were not equal to what was being offered. She had learned that in these situations, the attempt to find equal words only diminishes the offering. The honest response was simpler. Thank you, she said. She meant it without condition. Darlene Decker put on her coat. At the door, she stopped and turned back. Not because she had forgotten something, but because she had decided to say one more thing. He would have liked you, she said. Roy. He had no patience for people who made a production of doing the right thing. She almost smiled. You strike me as exactly his kind of person. She left. The room emptied the way rooms empty after something real has happened in them. Slowly, with more conversation than usual, people finding they had things to say to each other that they had not come in expecting to say. Vega stacked chairs. Carrie worked on the training log. Dr. Olson had left a donation at the door, stacked neatly, gauze and gloves and tourniquet kits in their original packaging, labeled in her handwriting. Morgan stood at the whiteboard after the room was empty and quiet. She looked at the 3 words she had put there when she first walked in. She uncapped the marker. She wrote a 4th word below them. Together. She looked at it, capped the marker, set it down. Outside, Harlan County held its shape the way it always held its shape, mountains on all sides, the air carrying the first real cold of the season, the sky doing what the sky did over this country in October, finding the last light along the ridge and pulling it out slow and gold before letting the dark take over. She stood on the gravel outside the door for a moment, breathing, her left leg aching in the familiar way it would ache for the rest of her life, and she was not minding the reminder the way she used to mind it. It was information about a body that had done a great deal and was still standing. That was a different way to read the same data. The 8 names were in her chest where they had always been. They were going to stay there. She had made her peace with that. She had made her peace with the fact that peace in the absence of weight were not the same thing and had never been the same thing, and that she had been waiting for the wrong condition. She was not waiting anymore. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She checked it once, habit more than need. No new messages. The 703 number had stopped calling 4 days ago. Northern Virginia area code, a congressional staffer probably, a federal agency recruiter, someone who had watched the coverage and made a calculation about her value in a different context. She looked at where the number had been. She put the phone away. Some things could wait. Some things might wait indefinitely. That was also acceptable. She had options she had not had 4 years ago when she drove into Harlan County in a car she had paid cash for and told herself that disappearing was the best she could offer the world. She did not believe that anymore. She had evidence against it. 19 people who had come on a Thursday morning and left knowing something they had not known when they arrived. A retired deputy who had looked at his own hands with the expression of a person discovering what they were capable of. A veteran who had found a context for his experience that felt, for the first time in years, like use rather than weight. Darlene Decker, who had driven 40 minutes to say what she came to say and then driven home. Morgan locked the door behind her. She walked to the car across the gravel she had memorized. She started the engine, pulled out onto the county road, heading north toward Harlan. The headlights opened a cone of light ahead of her, and the mountains rose on both sides, and the road ran through them the way it had always run through them, patient and unadorned. She did not turn on the radio. She had not turned on the radio since the morning at Kettle Fork. She had not missed it. The silence did not need filling. The silence was not the absence of anything. It was just the sound of where she was, which was a county road in Kentucky on an October night, heading somewhere she intended to be, with the names of the people she carried resting in her chest, the way they were supposed to rest, not as punishment, not as debt, but as the permanent record of what it means to have been present when something real was asked of you and to have answered. She drove north. The road held. I've told a lot of stories on this channel. Combat stories, stories of sacrifice and loss. But Morgan's story hit different. She didn't come home broken. She came home carrying something none of us ever had to carry. And she did it quietly, alone for 4 years, in a town that had no idea who was living among them. What got me was the notebook. 4 years of noticing. Not for a courtroom, not for revenge, just because she couldn't stop seeing what was wrong. Tell me, what moment in this story stayed with you the longest? Drop it below. I read every single one. New here? This is what we do. Real stories, real people. Subscribe and stay a while.